The surveillance footage from 1974 is grainy, flickering with the static of a dying machine. It captures a heavy steel door sliding open. 6 figures step into the vast, hollow echo of a rural Ohio shopping mall. They are silhouettes against the dust-choked light of the atrium. 30 days later, that same door opened again. But when the extraction team filed through, they counted only 5 people walking out into the daylight. One was gone. No signs of a struggle, no broken exits, and no explanation left behind. This was the liminal space experiment. For decades, the tapes sat in a restricted archive, silent witnesses to a disappearance that defied the laws of physics. We are pulling those files into the light, frame by agonizing frame. The footage shows them entering with bags and supplies, faces unreadable in the low-light glare of the security cameras. They walked into a structure that was supposed to be empty, a concrete tomb for retail. They did not know then that the building had its own plans for them. This is not just a missing persons case. It is a record of something that should not exist. We are investigating the geometry of that month, the silence that followed, and the final, impossible moment when the 6 subjects simply ceased to be. The truth is buried in these tapes. The first week followed a rigid, mundane rhythm. The 6 volunteers claimed the central food court as their base of operations. They dragged plastic tables together, scattering decks of cards and notebooks across the surface. The sound of shuffling cards echoed against the vaulted glass ceiling, a sharp, rhythmic intrusion into the absolute silence of the mall. They moved through the corridors with a strange, aimless efficiency, pacing the storefronts and tracing the patterns on the linoleum floors. High-definition cameras mounted in the rafters captured every movement, recording the soft thud of footsteps and the low mumble of conversation that never quite carried to the microphones. They looked like people waiting for a bus that would never arrive. Outside the food court, the mall remained a frozen tomb. Escalators stood motionless, their steel teeth biting into the dust. Shop windows displayed empty shelves and forgotten mannequins, all staring back at the group with hollow, painted eyes. The volunteers played through the hours, laughing at card games and drinking from thermoses, ignoring the oppressive stillness of the atrium. They treated the facility like a temporary shelter, not a cage. They had no way of knowing that the environment was already recalibrating around them, turning their routine into a precursor for something far more complex. On day 8, the rhythm shattered. The group sat in the atrium, laughing over a game, but Subject 4 was no longer part of the circle. He stood at the far edge of the corridor, motionless. He had stopped eating entirely. His rations remained untouched on the floor, the plastic seal unbroken for 2 full days. He did not move to the food court for meals, nor did he join the others when they paced the hallways. Instead, he stood before the display window of a vacant department store, his palms pressed flat against the cold glass. He remained there for 12 hours at a time, his gaze locked onto the reflection of the empty interior. The camera zoomed in, capturing the slight tremor in his hands and the way he leaned his forehead against the pane. When the researchers finally accessed the intercom to demand a reason for his behavior, he did not turn around. He kept his eyes fixed on the empty storefront, his voice thin and hollow as it carried through the recording equipment. He pointed at the glass with a rigid, shaking finger. "Do not look at the walls," he whispered. "The geometry is unfolding." He stayed in that position as the lights dimmed, staring into the dark reflection of a space that was beginning to change shape before his eyes. By day 15, the mall ceased to be a simple, empty structure for the volunteers. The cameras captured the group walking down the main corridor, but their pace was erratic and broken. They moved in a jagged, interrupted rhythm. One by one, they stopped, crouched, and crawled across the linoleum floor, their bodies twisting to navigate spaces that appeared entirely clear. Subject 2 led the way, stepping high over invisible mounds and ducking beneath non-existent beams. The others followed, their hands extended as if feeling for cold, hard surfaces that were not there. They maneuvered around the center of the hallway with the caution of someone walking through a dense, unseen thicket. When a volunteer reached out to steady themselves against a wall, they placed their palm against empty air, leaning their full weight into nothingness. They did not stumble or fall. They reacted to obstacles that the high-definition lenses could not resolve. The group moved with a collective, silent intensity, their eyes wide and fixed on the path ahead. The hallway remained vacant and pristine, yet they wove through it as if the atmosphere had become a labyrinth of solid, shifting geometry. They were no longer walking in a shopping mall. They were navigating a reality that only they could perceive. The visual footage was only half of the nightmare. The audio logs, recovered from the internal microphones, revealed a far more invasive reality. By the third week, the group stopped talking to each other entirely. Instead, they began to whisper into the empty air. They stood in the center of the food court, their heads tilted as if listening to a conversation that the cameras could not pick up. Subject 2 was recorded pacing near the fountain, his voice urgent and low. "I hear you," he said to the vacant lobby. "Wait for the others." He then recited names, calling out individuals who had never been part of the experiment, his tone shifting from confusion to a terrifying, hollow recognition. The microphones captured the sound of their voices overlapping, as if they were repeating words spoken by someone standing just inches away. They were not hallucinating alone. They were responding to a collective, external presence. When the researchers tried to isolate the audio, they found layers of static that formed rhythmic, human-like patterns. The mall was no longer a vacant retail complex. It had become a crowded room, filled with voices that had no source. Every corner of the atrium seemed to hum with the presence of people who were not there, and the volunteers were no longer observers. They were participants in a dialogue with a space that had finally learned how to answer them back. Day 25 brought the final breakdown of the environment. At exactly midnight, the overhead fluorescent lights began to flicker in a violent, rapid staccato. The rhythm was unnatural, a pulse that seemed to sync with the heartbeat of the building itself. As the lights strobed, the high-definition cameras captured a terrifying visual glitch. For 3 distinct frames, the rigid geometry of the mall failed. The corridor walls appeared to stretch and warp, pulling inward before folding back on themselves like thin, creased paper. Steel support beams curved as if they were made of soft clay. The floor tiles shifted, sliding out of alignment to create jagged, impossible angles that defied standard physics. Each time the lights dimmed and surged, the proportions of the atrium elongated, turning the familiar retail space into a distorted, claustrophobic tunnel. The volunteers stood motionless in the center of the chaos, their eyes tracking the movement of the walls, as if observing a natural phenomenon. They did not scream. They did not run. They simply watched as the physical boundaries of the facility lost all structural integrity. The mall was no longer a static container. It was becoming a fluid, shifting trap. The stability of their world had completely dissolved, replaced by a reality that could fold, stretch, and consume its own architecture. With the structural distortion reaching its limit, the volunteers moved as if directed by a single, unseen current. They stopped speaking. The frantic energy of the previous weeks vanished, replaced by a cold, efficient stillness. They abandoned the corridors, moving with measured, identical steps toward the center of the main atrium. There, they gathered in a tight, inward-facing circle. Their shoulders touched, forming a closed ring that excluded everything but the space between them. They stood perfectly upright, their heads bowed slightly toward the center point. Not one of them looked up at the cameras. Not one of them glanced at the fractured exits. They remained in this formation for hours, their breathing synchronized into a low, steady cadence that mimicked the hum of the failing power grid. The silence in the atrium became absolute, a heavy, suffocating pressure that seemed to drain the sound from the room. When the researchers attempted to communicate through the mall intercom, the group did not react. They did not flinch at the feedback or the blare of the speakers. They were entirely focused on the void within their circle. Every movement was deliberate, every posture rigid, as if they were waiting for a signal that only they could perceive. The anticipation in the room grew until it was physical. A taut wire stretched to the point of snapping, as the 5 subjects remained locked in their silent, final vigil. Day 30 arrived with the heavy grind of hydraulic rams. The extraction team breached the service doors, heavy gear clattering against the concrete floors. They moved in a wedge formation, weapons trained on the atrium center, expecting resistance or at least a reaction to the sudden intrusion. Instead, they found the silence absolute. The 5 subjects remained in their tight, inward-facing circle, eyes fixed on the ceiling, completely unresponsive to the shouting of the tactical officers. The team leader signaled for a count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The command echoed through the atrium, but the team stopped dead. They scanned the perimeter, checked the floor, and looked under the surrounding retail counters. Nothing. The manifest clearly listed 6 volunteers, yet only 5 remained. Subject 2 was gone. There was no sign of a struggle, no broken glass, and no hidden crawlspace. The team moved in, attempting to break the circle, but the remaining subjects did not pull away. They remained frozen, their gaze locked on a single, empty point in the air above them. The team leader reached out to grab the closest individual, but his hand passed through the space where Subject 2 should have been standing. They were not just missing. They had left no trace at all. The mission log recorded the failure to recover the full team, but the visual reality was far more severe. The circle was incomplete, and the void where a person had stood was now the center of the investigation. The lab technicians scrubbed the high-speed tapes, frame by frame, searching for a blind spot or a hidden exit. They isolated the final minutes before the breach. The footage showed Subject 2 within the circle, perfectly still, until the power flicker distorted the room. In one frame, he was there. In the next, the light strobed, and the space he occupied appeared to compress. The physics of the room shifted. Analysts mapped the depth of the hallway and the coordinates of the atrium, cross-referencing every pixel of the video data. The result defied standard optical recording. Subject 2 did not walk away. He did not climb, crawl, or run. He simply ceased to occupy the same dimension as his peers. The raw data showed his form thinning, stretching, and then folding into a point that no camera sensor could track. He remained in the frame for a microsecond after his physical mass had already vacated our reality. The scientists watched the playback on a loop, adjusting the contrast to see if any thermal signature remained. There was only cold, empty air. The geometry of the mall had acted as a sieve, filtering the subject out of the known world. The report remained classified, never reaching the public because the math did not support the existence of a missing person. It supported the existence of a missing reality. The findings never left the facility. Within weeks, the researchers were reassigned and their files were sealed under federal mandate. The retail complex in Ohio was designated a structural hazard, fenced off, and slated for total demolition. By the 3rd month, heavy machinery reduced the entire site to piles of pulverized concrete and twisted rebar. Every wall that had stretched, every floor that had shifted, and every corridor where the subjects had whispered were leveled until nothing remained but a flat, empty lot. The official report cited soil instability, but the truth was buried beneath tons of debris. Yet, the tapes survived. They remain in our archives, digitized and analyzed, waiting for someone to decode the final sequence. We are still digging into these files, looking for the patterns the scientists missed. If you want to see the conclusion of this investigation and uncover the next set of lost documents, make sure you have liked this video and subscribed to the channel. The geometry of the unknown is still unfolding, and we will be here to track it. Stay tuned for the next update.